Is that better? Yeah. All right, there. Now you can hear what I say. Sorry, I won't start over though. And we'll go through navigating some strategies on how you can work in your company to make this a better situation for all. So in the U.S., we have some political issues going on, as everybody knows. We won't dive too deep into those. But the CVE has what some people are calling a funding crisis. It was really just a deduction of CISA's budget from $4 billion a year to $3 billion a year by a guy named Elon Musk, I think you might have heard of. He just kind of decided everything could run for 25% cheaper and kind of living that in the U.S. in our government right now. So part of that was they didn't renew a contract through an organization called MITRE, which runs the CVE program. It's about $15 million a year, so 15% of $1 billion isn't a lot. So somebody shook the couch and found the $15 million and gave it to MITRE, and they continue the CVE program with no issues. So they called that that problem. The other problem is the NVD backlogs. We'll get into this a little bit later. The National Vulnerability Database is a federal organization meant to enrich data for U.S. federal government agencies, but 95% of people in the world who use CE data gets it from the NVD. And as a government agency, they are slow, bureaucratic, and they had hit their tipping point on what they can actually get done. It turns out they could analyze and keep up with about 80 CVEs a day. Last year we were at 125 CVEs published a day, and now we're at about 130 CVEs published per day. So they're just falling behind. And the last thing is the volume explosion, which I just talked about. We are seeing massive growth in CVEs reported by many companies. Well, that doesn't work. So as I talked about, the CVE program is the foundation everybody relies on to get their data. I was in Cambridge and they were talking about what's going to happen next. There are a couple of different things that could happen next. One is bifurcation. The EU would maybe start, they've started the EU vulnerability database. It's called EVD. Right now they have pinky promised to only publish CVEs in the EUVD. So basically it's just a backup of the CVE database right now. But pinky promises don't work when you have the politics that are going on in America. So anytime they could start publishing their own vulnerabilities. Russia has a very big database of vulnerabilities that is super interesting to look at. It's all public data though, so they're not putting anything super secret in there. They do have exploit data in their CVE database, so if that's something that you're interested in, and you have a good translator or know a little bit of Russian, you can go and look at their database and see, oh, this CVE is attached to this vulnerability, sometimes with proof of concept code in the database. So it's really an interesting place to dig into and look. So we already talked about the funding crisis. It's just getting worse and worse, especially on the NVD side. I put this slide here so we can come back and talk about NVD and the cascading effects. Is NVD refuses to use AI for good reasons. They've ran a bunch of tests, and the best they can get is 90% accuracy. I run an AI team, and 90% accuracy is the gold standard for an AI model. They're like, oh yeah, that's good. 90% accuracy for vulnerability data that's being published to the internet is terrible. So we have a mismatch in what AI can do at the time and what we need the data to be. And there's no easy way to pick out the 10% that are wrong. Sometimes it's very small, so you end up having to go back and check everything the AI model produced anyway. And scaling it with a team, human in the loop, is not possible due to government hiring regulations and the need for the people to be in offices, in seats, in Maryland, making Maryland wages, which is about $180,000 a year per analyst for CVEs. And believe it or not many people want to spend their whole life giving CVSS scores to vulnerabilities. And when you know that 45% of all vulnerabilities are WordPress vulnerabilities, that job gets even less and less attractive. So, as I talked, the NVD has a backlog now. Over 25,000 CVEs as of this morning have not been looked at by the NVD. 120 days is about what it's taking for anything that's not published by Microsoft, Apple, Cisco, HP, or Fortinet to get analyzed. CISA did step in and give them a list and say, here are the vendors that you have to prioritize CVEs for. You will notice that none of those companies that I mentioned are open source. If a company uses open source, those are not getting analyzed or prioritized. And in a backwards way, while they're looking at CVEs from Microsoft, Cisco, HP, etc., they're not looking at the open source tools that they use in there. So we're getting a backlog of published data that's out and not actionable on the average user's plate. So we're opening the windows for attackers in a way that we've not seen in the last 20 years. Because they have access to, hey, we know there's a vulnerability here, but it hasn't been CVSS scored, so your average company doesn't know how to prioritize it and patch it. So it's really opening the windows for red team and bad guys in general. CISA has stepped in to try to fill the void. They released a one-page paper last week called the CVE Quality Error. I was a co-author of that. I helped them sit down and talk about moving from the era of just trying to have as many CVEs published as possible to really making sure that CNAs who publish CVEs are providing all the data that people need. It's going to be a long, hard fight. There are tons of politics and nastiness and stuff that shouldn't be involved in this program, but it is. If you want to know about it, you can catch me at lunch, or you can just look up CVE Foundation and CISA, and there are plenty of stories about how those two groups don't really like each other and are not seeing eye to eye. So here's what this means for the average security professional that I really want to talk about. There are three things. First, we have the increased workload. If you work at a company who isn't a billion-dollar company and can't buy every feed, you're having to do a lot of handheld vulnerability management and lookup and research by yourself these days. That means you have to know what your stack is, you have to run it, you have to go read every CVE description and figure out, is it there or not? Really, for the last 20 years, have let the U.S. government build and maintain the vulnerability infrastructure and really take a lot of weight off of individual researchers and other companies to actually do the hard work of looking into vulnerabilities and seeing what's there and see if it affects us. And NVD has basically given up and said that they're not going to do that. So that leaves people, two options basically, and we'll get to those. We have new players that are entering the galaxy to keep with the space theme of this conference. ENISA, as we've talked about, is probably the biggest one that is coming onto the stage that you guys know about. I'm sorry, I don't see the UK launching a similar organization. If they are, I'd be interested to hear about it and work with them. Right now, it's ENISA, and it's going to be CISA kind of running both vulnerability management spheres for Europe and North America. They have a bunch of great conferences, so if you're looking for really key conferences, I would go to the ENISA website. They have day-long workshops, some are virtual. They're really great if you want to talk to people at the policymaker level and above. The alternative database constellation. So there are two databases that are free that if you're in vulnerability management, you know about. One of them is ran by Google. It is OSS.dev. OSV.dev is probably the biggest collection of open source vulnerability data in the world. It is very intense. It has commit numbers and stuff. So if you're in the open source space, that's a place to be. GitHub Advisory is a secondary source that most people are using. GitHub Advisories are for software hosted on GitHub. So if you have software on GitHub and it has a bug in it, you can get a CVE for that bug today and the GitHub security advisory page today. So it's growing fairly large. It's something to look at also. If you're the national certs, they are very great about having data that you can access. Normally you have to be a member of the community. Getting right into those are hard. There are also CIST for if you're, in oil and gas, et cetera, you can join and get privileged information there. The one I really want to talk about is the commercial services. This is where I have some issues. We're building a poverty line in vulnerability management for most people that I really don't like. There are 3 or 4 companies who are worth hundreds of millions of dollars who make the core of their money by taking vulnerability data from the NVD, from CVE program, enriching it and selling it to organizations that can afford it. I like capitalism. Money is great. I'm not against that. But what that does is it means If we're in an organization who can shell out $50 or $60 or $70,000 a year to get a feed of vulnerability data, you are able to protect your network much better than people who are only able to look at public data. If you're a university, high school, just a normal company with maybe one or two security people, one security person, you're not going to be able to spend that money to get those data. So I never tell people to go get a commercial vulnerability feed. I really, really want to work as hard as I can to open source this data. So if you look at rogolabs.net, it's my open source lab where I try to push all this data out. I have some programs there and some projects there I'd like you guys to look at. If you have any questions about them or any suggestions, please let me know. Did that one? So we are in a fragmented universe, and this is kind of the before talk. I hope to come back next year and give you guys a much cleaner and better view of where the CVE program is and what it's at. But right now, it's in a place where it's not in good shape for the average person and for the average organization, and we need everybody's voice to kind of jump in and help. If you use vulnerability data on a regular basis, there's a consumer working group that was just started by the CVE board that we'd like for you guys to join. If you use data in your job in an automated way, the automated working group has just moved to having their meetings at a Europe-friendly time, which is not a Jerry-friendly time. That means I have to get up at 6 a.m. to have meetings, but I've worked with Europe long enough to know that your guys' opinion is super important. So if you'd like to be part of the automated working group, I can send you the link to that, and we'd love for you to join and talk about how getting data, accessing data, and using data is important for your programs, both vulnerability management and commercial programs. So let's just talk about our organization in the new era before we move on. You're going to have to really think about how you patch vulnerabilities moving forward, and in a good way. Microsoft released a program, was it 2 months ago, 3 months ago, that said 90+% of all Windows 11 machines are on automatic patching, and close to 75% of their servers are the same. So when I first started, my biggest job was to go patch Windows machines and Windows servers. I would get up at, 2 a.m. on a Saturday, go in, drive into a NOC, Network Operations Center, and sit there and reboot servers for 6 or 7 hours over a Saturday. Luckily, nobody has to do that anymore. Microsoft has fixed that problem. So what I like to talk to people about vulnerability management problems is to stop thinking about, is everything patched? And start thinking about, what is the hardest thing to patch on my network? Is it the Java 8 application? Is it the IoT, OT stuff that I have? The stuff that's going to take 2 or 3 months, going to take planning, going to take time to sit down and come up with a plan and a rollback plan to start patching, because that's where you're going to get hacked. We are at a place where if you look for those hard vulnerabilities and patch those, you're going to make your network much, much safer, and you have to worry less about the automated patching that's coming out of both Microsoft and Apple. So the next thing I'd like to talk about is building a data aggregation platform. I have a script on GitHub that I'm happy to share with you guys. It's an Elk script. It stands up a Kibana's front end, and it brings in data from the NVD CVE program and the PSS program daily, and allows you to have all this data in one spot. It's the start of a CTI program, and it's free. I'm happy to talk to you guys about after that. Need correlation engines. This is where I can't help you. Automation is a super important part. you need to be able to hook your CVE data and your scanner data into your CDM so that you know what's on your network and can start to understand what's there so you can start looking for the software. If you're from a company that develops software, you really need to take time and understand what your stack is and what libraries and data are used in those stacks. It's something that's easily overlooked, and your library is 90% of the time where you're going to end up being vulnerable at. I like to joke with people. Most people didn't know what log4j was before the log4j vulnerability, and then in the next, 40 hours, people had to become log4j experts. And most of the time, I think over half or more than half of all the installations of log4j weren't vulnerable, so nothing needed to be done. But it just showed that they didn't know that they had that library in their application, what it was doing, how it was being used. So those 48 hours after that came out, people were becoming Java experts overnight, say, okay, we're not using this in this way, so we're safe, or, oh, we are, we need to update. The thing is that if you believe the statistics, the average application built by a small to mid corporation has 500 libraries in there when you go to codependencies. So what's the next log4j? Do you understand it? Do you have a dependency map for your application? Can you say, here's all the tools that we use that aren't written by us that we have to monitor and make sure the next time there's a vulnerability for, we can look at it. So I think that in the future we're going to move in three ways. We're going to reform the current CVE program. I hope that gets done in the next 6 to 18 months. AI will catch up and will be able to both analyze CVEs in your environment and fulfill the CVE data that needs to be completed so we can get rid of the backlog. I see that in the next 2 years. And then 3, they're going to be federated models before long. The U.S. shouldn't run the CVE program for the world. I've seen stuff ran by the UN, so I'm not going to say that the UN should run the CVE program. I think that it's probably going to have to be a federated group outside of the UN and maybe outside of government that is ran by major companies, major organizations, and major contributors to see this into the next 25 years, the CVE programs. So, key takeaways from our mission is embrace the multi-source. If you're not getting your vulnerability data from more than one source, you need to. Nobody is trustworthy 100% on their own. Context beats convenience. We have to know what's on your network, where is it running, what versions you're running to make sure that you can move forward and have a secure network overall. And 3, be prepared for this to change. I can come back next year and this could be a completely different talk because, CVE has been put out because Donald Trump woke up in a bad mood one day, right? So you never know with the U.S. now. Things are happening over there that I never thought would happen. So I am not willing to say that the future is one way or the other. I'm hopeful that everything stabilizes and that the CVE program is well ran for many more years to come. But I would start having, at least in the back of your mind, what's your backup plan if CVE.org went offline for an extended period of time. And with that, safe travel, space pioneers. Does anybody have any questions? Yes.
You talk about potentially. Oh, you're supposed to throw a ball there.
Oh, hello. So you talk about potentially an independent group managing CVEs going forward. Has anybody ever considered the fact that I would imagine part of this challenge with more CVEs comes from people trying to promote their code more quickly, maybe not taking as much care or testing. So potentially finding people who create the CVEs and using that to run it?
Well, you have to, that's an interesting question. I'll first start out by saying that about 40% of all CVEs are in WordPress plugins, and 40% of all most WordPress plugins are open source software. Yeah. If you criminalize open source software, that doesn't work. Also, there are not a lot of CVEs in, when you start talking about data sets. There are less than 300,000. And I thought the data scientists tell them that the data I work with is only 300,000 records. They're like, I get that in an hour and a half off some of my sensors. So it's not a big data set that we're working with. It's the need to hand check most of it that's causing the issues. Anything else?
No, that was it. Thank you.
So, what you're saying is, what we need is MITRE to sort it out and somebody to fund it realistically and go back to the way it was. But the problem is that the American government isn't going to pay the bill.
No, I think the American government will pay the bill. I think that Visa and other corporations don't want to depend it on the United States government to pay the bill anymore, because they don't think the program is well ran. We're recorded, so I will be polite here. The CVE program is 25 years old. It's still a Java-based program, and they're now putting all their data into a GitHub repository. There's no public API. Getting things changed is super hard. The board has mandated that there are only 3 fields necessary to publish a CVE record: the description, the affected product, and a CVE ID. And they're not willing to change that because they want to make it easy to publish CVEs. So there are a lot of deep structural problems with the CVE program that comes from every level. The funding from the government, the way MITRE has developed and ran the program, and the way the board manages the rules of the program have kind of come to a perfect storm here in the last 8 to 10, 12 months that really need to be addressed before someone like Adisa stands up and says, okay, the CVE program isn't savable. We're going to move everything to the European Vulnerability Database, and we're going to have sensible rules. It's going to be modern, and it's going to have an API. And then, I don't know, Brazil says the same thing, and Mexico says the same thing, and Canada says the same thing, and then we have, 47 different vulnerability databases that your company is now responsible to report to if you sell software there, right? So that's the tug and pull, right? People don't like the CVE program, they like to see different, but when push comes to shove, they're like, oh, let's stay with the CVE program before I have to go and report this vulnerability to every government independently. And it's a really hard place for people to be.
So change from within is probably the best option generally, or some coordination role.
Yeah, I think that there needs to be a big fundamental change in the CVE program, and I hope that that's what's coming.
Thank you.
Anybody else? If not, thank you guys very, very much for your time, and enjoy lunch.